great was the fall of it. So this morning's message is entitled, The God of the City.
Amen.
We're just a few days away from Passover. About 2,000 years ago, a few days before Passover, Jesus called all of his disciples together. And he told them, I'm getting ready to go away. And they said, go away? Well, can't we go with you? No, you can't go where I'm going. I'm going back to the Father. I'm going to be dying soon. They're going to kill me. But we won't let them kill you. We'll defend you. We'll protect you even with our lives. No, it's God's will. It's God's will that I die and that I go to my Father's place. And I go to prepare a place for you. But I will come back. I promise you I will come back and I will get you. Well, when are you going to come? How will we know? We can find that in Matthew 24. It says, when I come, it's going to be like in the days of Noah. For then the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. So you just continue to just living your life as you normally would. You don't know when I'm going to be coming, but you've got to be ready. You've got to be ready for me. That's what it was like when the floods came. Nobody was ready for those floods. And they all got swept away. But what else was going on back then? Why did the floods come? Why was God so angry? We find that in Genesis 6. And we can read what was going on back in those days, the days of Noah. Genesis 6, verses 1 through 5. It says, Now it came about, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and the land, and the daughters were born to them, that the sons of God, these are the angels, saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. And they still are. And they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. And the Nephilim were on the earth those days, and also afterward. And when the sons of God, when the angels came into the daughters of men, they bore children. These were the Nephilim, the offspring of that union between these rebelling angels, disobedient angels, and the daughters of men. They were the mighty men of old. They came down and they contaminated God's DNA of men. And then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, because they had that evil DNA in them. And every intent of thoughts of their hearts was only evil, and continually nothing but evil. Now, when God created the heaven and earth, there was supposed to be a division between man and the heavens. There was the world's domain, and then God's domain, the heavenly domain. And we see that these angels, these rebellious angels, they violated that divide. they disobeyed God and they came to earth and they impregnated the daughters of men. And that led to basically genetic mutations of man. The DNA was basically contaminated, which led to the Nephilim, very aggressive. And then evil filled the world. So God got mad and he flooded the earth. And it was his plan to restore Eden by starting all over again with 8 people. Noah and his descendants, his children. So after the flood, Noah's descendants, they spread eastward to an area in the Middle East that we call the Fertile Crescent. Now, I was thinking about this the other night. Why did they go east? You know, if you think about it, you know, back then, they didn't have very much knowledge of the universe. They probably thought the earth was flat. They didn't know that this earth went around the sun and there were other universes. I think all they know is when they got up in the morning, they could see that the sun came up in that direction. They don't know it's east, they just know that the sun goes up in that direction. And at the end of the day, it goes down over there and it gets dark. So if we go that way, we're probably going to be walking into darkness. If we go this way, east, we'll probably be walking into light. They don't want to be in darkness. That's why I feel, I have no way to prove it, that's why they went east, other than the fact God wanted them to go east.
Sounds good to me. Right on. Good.
So they went east, and then about 150 years later, after the flood, which is about 4 generations, they settled in a fertile area of the Fertile Crescent. That's that little area around the desert. Lots of fertilization, lots of plant life. They settled in an area called Shinar, and Shinar was in the area of Mesopotamia. And Shinar would eventually become what is Baghdad or Babylon or modern day Iraq. So it's still around. So 150 years have gone by, and some of the writers that I was reading about this, they kind of estimate that at that time, Noah's children, offspring, descendants probably numbered about 30,000 people at that time. And God had basically told them to scatter and to multiply. He wanted to spread the population. He wanted to rebuild on the earth again. And because they were all descendants of Noah, they all spoke the same language. So it was really easy for them to get along. Even if they run into another tribe somewhere else, you know, they all spoke the same language. They could communicate. So we pick up today's reading at Genesis 11. It says, at one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language, and they used the same words. As the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. So God had basically cleaned the slate of all sin and all the evil. But we're going to see that in only 4 generations, the people are starting to be evil again. They're beginning to become disobedient to God's will. God said, go out and scatter, spread out across the land, have children, multiply, cover the earth. So they're already rebelling. We see that in the next verse, verse 3. realize there's different tribes out there, but they're all centered around that Fertile Crescent area. They're all within a short distance of one another. And they began saying to each other, let's make bricks and harden them with fire. And then they said, come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous. Some of the translations say this will make a name for ourselves. And it will keep us from being scattered over the world. So you've got this one group of people. They're in Shinar. They've got a ruler, Nimrod. He wants to be known for being powerful and authority, and he's got this nice piece of land that he's got his people on, and he's not going to do what God says anymore. I'm not going to continue to scatter with my people. We're not going to be nomads anymore. We're going to settle right here, and we're going to build a city. And not only are we going to build a city, but we're going to build this tower that goes up into the sky so that we can be like the gods. All the other tribes are going to be envious of us because we have a city. So they're very prideful, they're very rebellious, and they're separating themselves from God. They're relying on their own strengths and abilities. They want to build a tower. They want to pierce that division between the heavenly domain and man's domain. And they want to build a city that comes against God's will, because God says, scatter. They want to settle down. And it's not wrong to settle down, but that was not the reason to settle down. They were prideful. They wanted to be famous. They wanted to be known that they were different. Verse 5 says, but the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower that these people were building. He says, look, the people are united. By that means they're all disobedient. It's not just one or two of them. They are all united. They're all being disobedient. They're all being sinful. They're all being prideful. And they all speak the same language. He says, now after this, if they set out to do anything, it's going to be possible. Nothing will be impossible for them, because basically once the sin begins to show itself in the world, it's just going to magnify and spread. You can't stop it. So he said, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other. So he's going to put an end to this. He's going to put an end to their arrogance and their pride and their disobedience. Because he's trying to rebuild the world. He's already flooded. He started out with Adam and Eve, then he's now relying on Noah, and already his plan is backfiring on him. Verse 6 says, in that way the Lord scattered them all over the world, and they stopped building the city. Amen. So God's will is right back into effect. Yes. And that is why the city was called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with different languages in the way that he scattered them all over the world. So they had one fear. They didn't want to be scattered. So the thing that they feared the most is exactly what God did to them. He scatters them. They were tired of being nomads. They're tired of having to keep traveling and living off the land, living off of God's provisions. They want to take care of themselves. They want to build a city. They want to make a name for themselves. They're prideful. They're arrogant. They're boastful. They want to be self-sufficient from God. You ever been that way? So they create a city. Because when you have a city, man controls his own rules. He makes his own laws. He controls his own fate. They don't want to be under God's laws or his command or what God wants them to do. They want to do it themselves. So this city becomes a new world order. You recognize that symbol up there? So one world government, a world that was separate from the will of God. I'm just hoping that as I'm sharing this story with you today, that you're going to see a parallel between the New World Order in Genesis and the New World Order that we read about in the book of Revelation. Two worlds that wanted to separate themselves from God. You see, in ancient times, the people didn't think that heaven was really that far up there. They thought that if you can climb up on a mountain, you're almost in heaven. You can touch God and talk to God. And they felt that if we can build this powerful high tower up into the sky, not only will we be better able to communicate with God, but we're going to be like God. All these other tribes are going to fear us because we've got this tower and we're up there with God. But God saw this as just arrogance, because not only were they shunning God and not including God, and he wasn't a part of any of these plans, but they were building this tower to worship their own idols. Because once you separate yourself from God's, you have to create your own God. So he decided he's going to remedy this situation, and he destroys his arrogance by confusing them so that they can't understand one another. And then, after he gives them all a different language, he divides the people up into different nations. And after he divides and there's only 30,000 people then. And after he divides all the different nations, he disinherits them. He disinherits them. He says, if you were trying to separate yourself from me, I'm going to separate myself from you. So he disinherited all the nations because they didn't put God first. They were disobedient to God. They were arrogant. They were prideful. Now, if we continue reading our Bible, when we get to the next chapter in Genesis chapter 12, God calls Abram. You know where he calls him out of? Mesopotamia, right where they're at. And he calls him out to be a father of a new nation, Israel. A new nation that he can call his own. It's going to start over. First you had Adam, then you had Noah. It's going to start over with a new people, a new nation, with with Abraham as the father. Now in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, we can see what took place there. How God dispersed the nations. It says, when the Most High God assigned lands to the nations, when he divided up the human race, he established the boundaries of the people. So he put them in particular places, speaking different languages, according to the number in his heavenly court. For the people of Israel belonged to the Lord, so he was going to create this new nation called Israel. And Abram and this new nation that he created, all of his descendants, they would one day bless the entire world. All of his descendants were going to bless the rest of the world. So what we're seeing here is that the Old Testament is really a tale of two stories, of two cities. It's a tale of two cities. You've got Jerusalem, which was created by God, and God is Yahweh is the God of the city. And then you've got Babylon, a city that was created by man under the influence of Lucifer, the sinful spirit, the spirit of pride. Lucifer's pride, that was the first sin. That's what got him kicked out of heaven. And it was the first sin that we had on earth, pride. So I say, is there anything wrong with building a tower? No. There's really nothing wrong with building a tower. Is there anything wrong with, having all the people come together to build a tower? No, there's nothing wrong with that either. And is there anything wrong with building the tallest tower in the world at that time? No, there wasn't anything wrong with that. The Tower of Babel, if it was completed, would have been the tallest tower in the world back then. So do you know what the tallest tower in the world is today? The Burj Khalifa. There it is. You know where it is?
Mesopotamia.
Right outside of Mesopotamia, in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. Right back where the Tower of Babel was.
Wow.
The tallest tower in the world. It's 2,722 feet in the air. That's more than a half a mile.
How often does it get struck by lightning?
I don't know.
He's got a lightning rod on the top.
It's 163 floors.
Wow.
Can you imagine being on the 163rd floor and there's a fire? Oh well. Lord, I'm up here and you know where I'm at. So it's a half a mile piercing the heavenly domain. So is it wrong to advertise that you're the tallest tower in the world? No, there's nothing wrong with that. But at some point we kind of drift over into the danger zone. And it's one of those things that we don't see coming, and that's when we cross over and pride takes over. Like I said, pride was the first sin. Lucifer. Because ambition is not wrong. God loves ambition. He gives us ambition. Competition isn't wrong. He says we're all running a race. So competition isn't wrong. Winning isn't wrong. We've got to win that race. Celebrating our victories, that's not wrong either. And being the best is not wrong. But when what you're doing and why you're doing it is all about you, you, well, that's pride. If it's all about you, like it was here, then pride has taken over. You've crossed over the line into sin. When you've got money, and you've got prestige, and you've got friends in high places, you don't think about God very much. You don't think about why you need God. But if you're flat broke and you're all alone, you don't have anybody to turn to, I think we've all been there. We need God. We need God a lot. We start turning to God, praying to God, asking for His mercy, asking for His help. Give us some hope, Lord. Give us some hope. But our desperate attempts sometimes also leads us to cross over that line into sin. Because sometimes we compromise our values in order to be the best. Sometimes we compromise our values in order to be the winner. In the name of independence, in the name of freedom, to control our destiny, to be the best at what we're doing, we'll do some things we shouldn't be doing. And that's what this story is all about. So as we cut corners and we use illegal drugs and we break the rules and we lie to our parents, we lie to our friends, sometimes we just lie to ourselves. You know, we cross the line. So there's nothing wrong with building a tower. There's nothing wrong with a good reputation, and there's nothing wrong with working as a team. But when those things are fueled by arrogance and disobedience,